Okay, chapter 2 really talks about, is it time to talk about living arrangements? And notice how I worded that. It's about, is it time to talk about living arrangements in the future, later life care? It makes me cringe, and I feel like doing worse things than that when people say, well, we need to talk about a nursing home. So first of all, and I'll talk about this in the next slide actually, is about care options and what we call things. So we're going to talk about living arrangements. Understand that when you sit down and say, let's have a conversation about later life decisions. What is it that and you know what? There's no reason why you can't all do it at the same time. You don't make your loved one or your loved one and their spouse feel special because they want to be included as part of a group activity, but they also aren't sure how to fight back. And the reason why they want to fight back is because of fear. And of course, caregivers, family members don't necessarily want to have the conversation either because, gosh, my parents are getting older. We're talking about what's going to happen to them when they're not functioning very well, and that they may not be the same person. And I just don't want to think about that. Well, putting your head in the sand only creates more problems, as Hannon pointed out in some of his legal documents. So the easiest way to start the conversation is to ask some questions. If later in life you can't take care of yourself, how do you want to see that happen? What are your thoughts? And respect the answers. Don't negate them and say, oh, you don't want to do that. You said you never wanted to do that. Don't do that. This is about listening first. So look at the situation from the other side. This person is coming from a place of fear, and they're confiding in you as a family member and a caregiver potentially as to what they want. So as Angela said, stay in the now. Don't try to predict the future. It's a waste of energy. Trust me, 14 years of it, I can verify. I have walked in your shoes. I have felt the pain. I have made the wrong decisions, and I have questioned everything that I've done. I've sat in the parking lot and cried. Could have used Angela then, by the way. And it's a difficult journey. That's why the book's called It's Not That Simple. But I learned lessons, and I want you to read the book so that you don't make the same mistakes I did, and have some epiphanies and learn how to speak to your loved one in a different way. So the book covers, when do you start having these conversations? And the answer is as soon as possible. There is no reason why, if your parents are in their 60s, that you can't sit down, have a picnic lunch and say, okay, so, and like give them a heads up, don't like spring it on them. But you want to ask them, when things do kind of go south, when you end up in a situation where you can't care for yourself, what's your plan? What are you thinking? What would you like? And so then in the book, we talk about, how do you know it's time? So you ask them, what behaviors should we look for when you may not recognize them yourself that would indicate that it might be time? Have them answer the questions. You don't need to push this on them. And that's the biggest problem, is when you push and say it's time. So this is the avoiding the situation of being under duress is really important. Planning, which we've all talked about, helps you to have the conversation iteratively across several weeks or even months, especially if your parents are in their 60s. So what do you say then? And then how do you handle resistance? And it's fascinating to me how much resistance there is. So I want to talk about the care options, and then I want to talk about why there's resistance and what emotions you're going to go through. So with care options, what are the care options? Okay, so I'm just going to get my pet peeve out of the way right now and say, stop calling it a nursing home. It's a care facility unless your loved one has a medical issue where they need skilled nursing. Then that's a nursing home. Where this comes from is that back in the 60s, 70s, and even 80s, all you had was nursing homes. There was no assisted living and memory care or independent living even. There were no real options. And so part of what I consider to be my role is to educate caregivers, family members. Look, they're not nursing homes. So your loved one is living in a different generation and says, you're not putting me in a nursing home. Well, no, you're right, we're not. They're right, you're not putting them in a nursing home. You're putting them in a community, a senior living community that fits with their progressing aging needs. See how those words made such a difference? So what should you be looking for in a care community? Well, it can be something like in this image where it's apartment living, basically. You're going back to your apartments, your condo living. It can be, my parents had a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment with a full kitchen and everything until, as mom progressed, we took the kitchen out, it was microwave, because for the most part, people with Alzheimer's can be dangerous to themselves and potentially to others if they start a fire or something like that. It's not their fault. Recognize that this is the disease, it's not the individual. And so, and I'm going to talk about communication in a bit, but the challenge here is that when you try to force something on someone who isn't the same person that they used to be, then you've got to evolve that conversation. You've got to realize that you have to meet them where they are at. And usually that's coming from a place of fear, and then understanding to what their viewpoint is, and that may change from moment to moment potentially. So it requires you to be fast on your feet, or it requires you to step back and just listen. And that's really hard to do when you're a type A person with a lot of control requirements. So I'm just saying that I wasn't perfect at this. Nobody is. You know why? Because we've never gone through it before. Never. Who would have thought, right? And so it's okay to not be perfect and to make mistakes. I just hope that you take a chance to read the book to help you feel better about that, but more importantly, to have the tools and the guidance that you need, the compass that you need on this journey. And so one of the key things here is that you don't want to have any of these conversations under duress. In other words, here's what most care community leaders tell me happens. They see 2 types of clients: the planners, which are a smaller portion, of course, who are, you know what, we want to see where we're going to live, we want to check out what's important to us, we want to observe, we want to eat the food, we want to talk to the nutritionist. Some of the care communities have memory care programs where they actually will focus on delaying as much as possible the progression of dementia and Alzheimer's. And so there's those people who are spending maybe even a year looking at places, getting on the waiting list, but because these places are usually booked up, and as baby boomers age, they're going to be booked up more, so you've got to plan for that. Or there's the people who are under duress. Mom fell, she has dementia, she's in the hospital. The hospital says the arm or whatever is healing, take her to respite care at an assisted living community. She goes there in respite care, and then she never comes home. She goes and moves into an apartment in assisted living. Now, if you're the caregiver trying to make that decision because the hospital tells you 2 days before she's going to be discharged, got to find a place, guess what? You're under pressure, and you didn't do any research, and you don't know how much money you have, and you may not have a plan, so you may not even be financially responsible for paying the bill, and you have no authority to pay the bill from the money that's in your parents' or your loved one's account. Cue Hannon, where that's what a durable power of attorney is for, is to handle the finances. So you can really back yourself into a corner if you're not careful. And unfortunately, a majority of people can be in that situation.